I had not spoken aloud to another living thing in 109 days when the small one came up out of the storm. And I know the number because I kept it the way a man keeps a debt, scratched into the doorframe with the point of my knife, so the silence would have a shape I could look at. Up at Stair 9 you learn to keep numbers. There is little else to keep. The relay sits where Coron Pass folds back on itself for the last time before the saddle, a squat stone house with a steel mast bolted into the spine of the mountain, and a wire running down the throat of the world to the lowland towns that none of us up here ever name with any tenderness. My work was simple, and it never ended. The wind tried to tear the mast loose, and I would not let it. Ice built on the dishes, and I went out and broke it off with a wooden mallet so the lowlands words could keep passing through me on their way to wherever words go. I was the place the signal did not die. That was the whole of the job. For that, they sent a sled up twice a year with flour and lamp oil and salt fish, and a crate of the cheap candles I read by, and they left me alone, which was the part of the wage I valued most. I had flown once. I want that said plainly and then set down, because it is not the story and I will not let it become the story. For 11 years I carried the courier runs through the chop between the lowland ports, low and fast over water that would kill you in 4 minutes if it took you, and I was good, and being good at a thing like that does something to the inside of a person that does not heal clean when the thing is taken away. They took it away. There was a reason, and the reason was fair, and I have made my peace with the fairness of it the way you make peace with a winter, by surviving enough of them. When the flying ended, I did not want the ground. So I took the highest ground there was, and I have kept the wire here ever since, 20 years alone, which the lowland thought was a punishment, and which I understood from the first night to be a mercy I had been clever enough to ask for. I am telling you this so you understand what kind of person was inside that house when the knocking started. Not a soft one, not a man waiting to be a father, not a woman with a hole in her shaped like a child she had lost. I had no lost child. I want the people who tell this wrong to hear that. I had nothing missing that a small one could fill. What I had was a wire I would not let die, and a mountain I knew the way you know your own hands in the dark. And it turned out in the end that those two things were enough. The storm that brought her was the third of the season, and the worst I had seen in 5 years. It came up the pass the way the bad ones do, not as wind, but as a wall, a gray wall that ate the saddle and then ate the lower switchbacks and then ate the light. And by the second evening, I had the shutters barred and the lamps lit, and I was sitting close to the stove listening to the mast sing its highest note, the one that means the wind has stopped being weather and started being a thing with intent. I had food and oil, and the wire was holding. I expected nothing of that night except to outlast it. The knock, when it came, did not sound like a knock. It sounded like the storm had finally worked a board loose and was beating it against the door, and I sat with that thought for the length of 3 breaths before some older part of me, the part that flew, the part that knew the difference between a sound the world makes and a sound a living thing makes, stood me up out of the chair before my mind had finished the argument. I opened the door against the wind with my shoulder, and the cold came in like a struck blow, and there, on the step, below the height where I had been looking, low, small, folded down against the stone with one gray hand still raised toward the wood, was the child. I did not know then what she was. I knew only that she was small and alive, and that she had climbed something no grown person should have survived to reach my door, because the lowest switchback where a body could have started was 4 hours' climb below in fair weather, and there had been no fair weather for 2 days. I got my hands under her, and she weighed almost nothing, the way the half-frozen weigh nothing, the body having spent everything it had on the one task of staying. I brought her in and put my shoulder to the door until the bar dropped and the storm was shut outside where it belonged. And then I knelt on my own floor with the small one in my arms and looked at her in the lamplight for the first time. She was not human. I had been a long time alone, but I was not so far gone that I thought a human child had walked up Coron Pass in a blizzard. Her skin was the gray violet of the sky an hour before snow, and her ears came to soft points, and her eyes, when they opened to a slit and found me, were a clear amber that held the lamp the way water holds it. She was wrapped in something that had been a good wrap once and was now only a memory of warmth, a layered cloth gone stiff with ice, and under it she wore the rest of what she had: a tunic, a single boot, the other foot bound in rag. She looked at me out of that amber, and she did not cry, and she did not scream, and I have thought since that this is the thing I should have understood first and did not. A small one that does not cry when it is found has already learned that crying brings the wrong people. She had learned it young. She watched me with the still, weighing patience of something that had decided long before this night that the world was a place that had to be survived rather than trusted, and she was now, against that long judgment, taking the measure of me. "All right," I said, and the word came out cracked and strange from a throat that had not made words in 109 days. "All right, you're in now. You're in. I did the things you do. I have no training for the half-frozen, but I had brought myself back from the edge of it more than once, alone, and the body's needs are not so different across the kinds of people that wear them. I got the stiff wrap off her and the wet clothes, and I rubbed the life back toward her hands and her one bare foot, slow, not hard, the way you warm a thing you are afraid of breaking, and I wrapped her in the wool I slept under and set her near enough to the stove to take the heat, but not so near it would hurt the numb places when the feeling came back into them. Because the feeling coming back is its own small cruelty, and I did not want her to learn another one under my roof. I melted snow and warmed it to barely warm and held the cup to her, and she drank, watching me over the rim, and when she had drunk she let her eyes close, and I thought she had gone under into the dangerous sleep, and I shook her gently, and she opened them again and made a sound, the first sound, low in her throat, a sound that was not a word in any tongue I knew, but that I understood the way you understand a thing that means I am still here, stop. So I stopped shaking her, and instead I talked. I had not talked in 109 days, and now I could not stop. I told her about the wire and the mast and the wind's highest note. I told her about the flower sled and the cheap candles. I told her the names I had given the rocks I could see from the window when the weather let me see anything, because a person alone names things. It cannot be helped, and I had named the rocks. None of it was for her. She could not have understood a word. It was for the both of us, to put a human voice into a room that had a small living thing in it again, because some animal part of me knew that a voice in the dark is a kind of warmth too, and I gave her the only warmth I had a surplus of. She listened. I do not mean she understood. I mean she listened, the way the very tired listen, letting the sound be a thing to hold to, and somewhere in the middle of my talking about the rocks her eyes stayed closed, and her breathing went long and even and good, not the dangerous shallow sleep but the deep one. And I sat back against the leg of my own table and watched a small alien child sleep on my floor, and felt the silence of 109 days break apart inside me like ice off the dishes. I did not sleep that night. I sat up and fed the stove and watched the door as if the storm might find a way through it, and toward the gray beginning of morning I let myself think the first of the hard thoughts, which was this: she had come from somewhere. She had not been born on my doorstep. Below the storm, down where the maps put the towns I did not name with tenderness, something had happened that had put a small one on the pass alone in the worst weather of the year, and whatever it was not finished, because things like that are never finished by the time the small one reaches your door. They are only beginning to climb up after. I want to tell the part that follows slowly, because it is the part people get wrong. They make it sound like I knew, that first morning, what I was going to do. I did not know. I am not made of the stuff that knows things like that all at once. What I had that morning was a small one asleep on my floor, and a wire that needed its ice broken, and a storm that would not let me out the door to break it, and those were problems enough for one gray dawn. The rest came the way the truth always comes to me, which is slowly, and against my own preference, and too late to be turned aside. She slept most of the first day. I broke from her side only to do the work I could do indoors, and there was little of it, and so I spent more of that day watching her than I have spent watching anything in 20 years. I learned her sleeping face. I learned that she slept with one hand fisted, always, even in the deepest part, as though she held something or was ready to. I learned the shape of the burns of cold on her one bare foot, and I dressed them with the salve I kept for my own hands, and she did not wake. Toward evening she woke all at once, the way the watchful wake, eyes open and already moving before the body had stirred, finding the room, finding the door, finding me, and going through that order in less than a breath. And I saw the fear come up in her, and then I saw her put it down, deliberately. A child putting down fear the way a tired worker sets down a tool. And the sight of that did something to me I did not have a word for and still do not. "Hungry?" I said, and made the motion of eating, fingers to my mouth, slow. "You, hungry?" She watched the motion. She made it back to me, exact, fingers to her own mouth, and held my eyes while she did it, and that was the first thing we built together, that small bridge of one shared sign. And I have built things in my life I was prouder of in the moment, and almost nothing I am prouder of now. I fed her broth that night, fish and melted snow and the last of the dried greens, and she ate the way the long-hungry eat, fast at first and then slowing as the body remembered there might be more. And when she had finished, she looked at the empty bowl and then at me and made the eating sign again, a question this time, and I gave her a little more. Not all I had but a little more, and she understood the limit in it and did not ask again. She was no infant. She had the long patience of a small one who has had to ration herself before. I put her age at, but I will not put her age at anything. She was small. She was young. She was old in the way the past makes things old. That is all the measuring I will do of her, then or now. On the third day the storm broke enough that I could get out to the mast. And I did, because the work does not care what has come to your door. And I broke the ice off the dishes with the wooden mallet, and felt the wire come alive under my hand the way it does, the faint hum of all the lowlands words pouring up through me again. And while I worked I looked down into the throat of the pass where the weather was lifting, and I saw, far below, small as a line of insects on the lowest switchback the eye could reach, the thing I had been waiting for without letting myself know I waited. Column. Soldiers climb a mountain in a particular way, and there is no mistaking it once you have seen it. They climb roped in order with the spacing of people who have been told that the spacing will keep them alive, and they were climbing in that order, and they were climbing toward me, because there is nothing on Coron pass above the lowest switchback except Stair 9, and the saddle and the long fall on the far side, and a column does not climb toward a saddle. A column climbs toward a place it has been told to reach. I went back inside and barred the door and looked at the small one, who had pulled herself to the window in my absence, and was looking down the pass through the gap in the shutter with her fisted hand pressed white against the stone of the sill. And I understood, all at once and far too late to turn aside, what I was going to do. I am going to tell you about the wire now, because the wire is the thing that let me know what was coming, and a person should understand the instrument that decides their life. The relay at Stair 9 does not only break ice and pass signal, it listens. It cannot help listening. That is what a relay is, a thing that hears everything that comes up the throat of the mountain and decides what to send on. For 20 years I had listened to the lowland talk to itself. Supply orders, whether the small dramas of small towns, the dull traffic of a place that did not know or care that a person on a mountain heard all of it. I had stopped truly hearing it years ago, the way you stop hearing a river you live beside. But that night, with a column on the switchbacks, I sat down at the set, and I listened on purpose for the first time in longer than I could say, and I turned the dial down into the lowland's voice, and I heard them looking for her. They did not call her a child. That is the thing I want you to hold. In all the traffic that came up the wire that night, in all the orders and the answers, there was a word they used, and the word was not child. It was a word for property that has gone where it was not given leave to go. It was a word a clerk uses. They were a recovery. The column was a recovery column, and the thing it was climbing to recover had a number. and I sat in the dark with the lowland's flat clerking voice in my ear, and I looked across my own room at the small one asleep with her hand fisted against the cold, and I felt the iron go into me, and it has not come out since. I have been asked, by the few people I have told, whether I hesitated. They want me to have hesitated. It would make a better story, the hard old woman on the mountain who had to be talked into her own decency by the sight of a sleeping child. I will not give them the better story. I did not hesitate. The hesitation, if it was anywhere, was all in the days before, in the slowness of my understanding, in how long it took me to let myself know what had walked up my pass. But once I knew, once I had the clerk's word for her in my ear and her sleeping face in my eye, there was no decision left to make. There was only the working out of how. A thing was true about me that had always been true, and that the mountain and the silence had let me forget, which is that there are people in this universe who will be handed a small one and a clerk's word, and a column climbing to enforce the word, and who will do the arithmetic and hand the small one back. And I was not one of them, and I never had been, and it had only taken me 20 years and a blizzard to be shown the shape of my own self again. I let her sleep. I went to the wire and I did a thing I should not have done and would do again. I sent down the pass, on the relay's own authority, a weather notice, a real one. The storm was real and worsening on the far side of the saddle, and I worded it the way the lowland words such things, in the dead clerking tongue, and I marked the upper switchbacks impassable above the relay until further notice, sealed by the keeper of Stair 9, which is a thing the keeper of Stair 9 is permitted to do when the keeper of Stair 9 judges the way unsafe. It is meant to turn back sleds and the foolish. It would not turn back a recovery column with orders, but it would go into the lowland's record, and the lowland is a place that loves its record more than it loves anything that breathes, and I wanted it in the record before anything else happened, that the keeper had judged the way unsafe. Not for them, for her, so that whatever the column did above the seal, it had been told. Then I sat down to wait, and to learn the child while I had the time, because I am a practical creature, and I knew that to keep a thing alive on a mountain, you must first know what it needs. She woke, and I gave her the eating sign, and she gave it back, and we ate. I had begun, by then, to give her sounds along with the signs, my words attached to the motions, the way you teach anything, and she had begun, in her watchful way, to take them. By the second evening of the column's climb, she had a handful of my words, and I had 2 of hers. The low throat sound that meant stop, I am here, and a high soft click of the tongue she made when she was content, which I heard for the first time when I gave her my own wool to wrap in, and she pulled it to her face and made the click twice, and I had to turn to the stove and be busy with it for a moment so that she would not see what the sound had done to my face. I do not know all of what had been done to her below. I never learned the whole of it, and I have not tried to. Because there is a kind of knowing that helps no one and only feeds the wrong fire, and I had a fire of the right kind to feed, and not enough of myself to feed too. But I learned the edges of it from how she was. She flinched from the door, never from me. She ate fast and rationed herself both. She held my eyes when she signed always, because she had learned that the eyes are where you find out whether the next thing is going to be done to you or for you. And once, when I moved too quick to catch a falling pot, she went down into a crouch so fast and so small that she was behind the table before the pot had hit the floor, folded down into nothing, fisted hand over her own mouth to stop the sound, and I stood there with the fallen pot ringing on the stone and understood that I was looking at a thing she had practiced. A child does not learn to disappear that fast in a kind place. I did not go to her. I knelt down where I was, slow, and I put my own hands flat on the floor where she could see them empty, and I made the content click, badly, the best I could, and I waited. And after a long while she came out from behind the table on her hands and knees and crossed the floor to me and put her small gray hand on top of my big scarred one. And that was the second thing we built, and it was the better of the 2. The column climbed for 2 days. A column climbs slow on Coron Pass, slower than a single fool, because a column carries its own pace and its own weight, and it cannot be braver than its most frightened roped man. I tracked them from the mast each time I broke ice, watched the line of them gain one switchback and then halt and then gain another, and I did my arithmetic. I knew the pass. I knew where above the relay the way narrows to a single shelf with the wall on one hand and the long fall on the other, the place the sleds dread, the place we call the throat because the mountain swallows there. I knew where the wind came across the saddle in the late afternoon like a hand sweeping a table. I knew that the storm that was lifting on my side was building on the far side, and that the saddle, which they would have to cross if they meant to take her down the only other road, was about to become a place where roped men died. I knew all of this the way I knew my own hands, and I let it sit in me, and I did not yet know which of it I would use, only that the knowing was a kind of weapon, and that I had more of it than they did, and that the mountain, if I asked it right, was on my side and not theirs. On the morning the column reached the lowest point from which a man could see the relay, I dressed the small one warm in what I had made over for her from my own spare wool, and I sat her by the stove away from the door, and I knelt in front of her and held her eyes the way she had taught me you must, and I gave her, slow and clear, the only thing of importance I had managed to teach her in the words she had taken from me. "Stay," I said, and made the sign we had built for it, my flat hand pressing down on the air. "You stay here." And then, because she had taught me that the eyes are where you find out what the next thing is, I held mine on hers and let her find in them that the next thing was for her and not to her, and she looked, and she found it, and she made the content click once soft and pressed her fisted hand to my chest where the iron was, as though she could feel it there, and maybe she could. They feel things, her kind. I have come to believe they feel more than we do and only show it less, having learned earlier than we do what showing costs. Then I went out to meet the column, because a thing met on your own ground on your own terms is a different thing from a thing that comes to your door. I did not go down to them. That is the first rule of the high ground, and I had 20 years of it. I went up onto the spur above the relay where the mast stands, where a person can be seen from below standing against the sky, and where the wind comes hardest, and I stood there in my own weather that I had lived in for 20 years, while below me men who had never been so high in their lives came up out of the lowlands' thick warm air into a cold that was already starting to tell them, in the only language the mountain speaks, that they did not belong here. I let them see me. One figure against the sky, on ground that was mine. I have flown low and fast over killing water, and I know what it is to make yourself small and quick and unseen, and I know its opposite, which is to make yourself one still large certain thing that the other must account for, and I chose the opposite, and I stood, and I waited for them to climb the last of the way to where words could cross between us. The one who spoke for them was not the one in front. The one in front was a climber, a local, roped lead, a man who knew the mountain a little and did not want to be there, and I marked him as the one to watch because a man who does not want to be there is the crack you work. The one who spoke was 3 back, a lowland officer in lowland cold gear that was good gear and not good enough, and he had a voice trained to carry, and an authority trained to expect to be obeyed, and he spent both on me across the wind. He told me his column's business. He used the clerk's word. He told me a recovery had come up the pass to this relay, that the keeper of Stair 9 had no doubt sheltered it in good faith, not knowing what it was, and that I was now to produce it, and that I would be thanked for my trouble, and the column would descend before the far weather closed the saddle, and that all of this was simple and lawful and would be quick. I let the wind have a long moment of his words, and then I gave him mine, and I did not raise my voice, because the high ground does not need to raise its voice, and because I wanted him to lean toward me to hear, to come up another step into my cold to catch what I said, and he did. "There's a seal on this pass above the relay," I said. I said it. Weather. Weighs unsafe above Stair 9 until I lift it, and it's in the lowland's own record that I judged it so, time-stamped before you ever came in sight. You climbed past a lawful seal. That's on your record now, officer, not mine. Your clerks will find it. He had not known about the seal. I saw it cross him. A lowland officer lives and dies by the record, and I had just told him the record had a mark on it with his column's name in it, and a crack opened in his certainty, small, the kind of crack I had worked open in worse weather than this. The seal's weather, he said. We've climbed through worse. A lie, they had not. I could see it in how the roped men behind him stood. Produce the recovery and we'll descend below your seal before the saddle closes and your record stays clean. There's no recovery here, I said. There's a child. The word landed wrong on him. I had used it on purpose, the right word against his clerk's word, and I watched it land and find no place to sit because his orders had no slot for it. He had been sent to recover a thing with a number, and I had handed him, across the wind, a thing with a name for what it was, and a clerk does not know what to do with that, and the crack widened. You'll produce it, he said, and his voice had gone to the flat place a man's voice goes when he has stopped arguing and started preparing to make a thing happen, and I knew the time for words was thinning. Or this column will produce it. We've a warrant under the Carrow writ, and the keeper of a relay does not stand above a writ. Stand aside, keeper, and let us into the house, and you keep your seal and your wage and your mountain, and we forget you made us climb for it. And here is the place where the people who tell it wrong want me to have done something grand. They want a fight on the spur. They want me to have struck the officer down, to have stood in the door of the house, and held the column at bay with my old courier's nerve until the small one was safe. I did none of it. I am one woman and they were a roped column of armed men, and the small one was inside, and the only fight I could win against them was a fight I did not let them know we were having. I had been winning it since I set the seal. I won the rest of it with the mountain, and the mountain does not need me to strike anyone. You'll not get into the house, I said, but that's not the thing that's going to turn you. Look behind you, officer, look at the saddle. He did not want to look. To look was to take his eyes off me, and a part of him still thought I was the danger. But the climber in front, the local, the one who did not want to be there, he looked, because he was the one of them who knew enough to be afraid of the right thing, and what he saw made him say something low and fast to the officer in the lowland tongue, and the officer looked. And I watched the column see the saddle for the first time, the way I had been watching it for 2 days. The far weather had come over. While the officer spent his trained voice on me, the storm I had been tracking on the blind side of the saddle had topped it, and it was coming across the high flat ground in the late afternoon wind exactly as it always does, as a hand sweeping a table, and the road they had meant to take the small one down, the only road down that did not pass back through my seal and my record, was closing in front of all of them, white and roaring, and would be gone inside the hour, and would not open again for a day or more. By which time the cold up here, the real cold, the cold that lives above the relay and that they had no gear good enough for, would have done its slow arithmetic on roped men caught in the open. The officer did not know the mountain. But the climber did, and I saw the climber do the same sum I had done 2 days before, and I saw him decide, the way a man decides when his own life is the thing in the balance and no writ reaches high enough to spend it for him, that this column was going to descend now, below my seal the way it had come, or it was going to die on Coron Pass for a clerk's word, and I saw him turn and say so to the men on the rope behind him, who were the ones who would die, and who therefore listened to him and not to the officer. The officer gave one more order. I will give him that. He was not a coward, only a man who had mistaken his authority for a thing that worked above the tree line. He ordered the climber on up to the relay to me. And the climber, roped lead, the man on whose hands all their lives hung, looked at the saddle and looked at the officer and looked at me standing one still certain thing against the sky on ground I had kept for 20 years, and he did the only sane thing, which was to refuse. He did not put it in words a clerk could write down. He simply turned downhill and began to descend, and a roped column can only go where its lead goes, and the men behind him went, because the rope is the rope, and the saddle was closing and the cold was already in their hands, and the officer stood alone for a moment on my mountain with his writ and his good not good enough gear, and then he too turned and went down after his column, because a column that descends without its officer is a worse mark on the record than a recovery that failed, and he knew it. I stood on the spur until the last of them was below the lowest point from which the relay could be seen. It took a long time. The wind tried the whole while to tear me off the spur, and I would not let it, the same as I would not let it have the mast, and when they were gone I went down off the spur and I broke the ice off the dishes, because the work does not care, and the wire came alive under my hand, and I sent down the pass, in the clerk's dead tongue, a notice that the saddle road was closed by weather and the upper switchbacks remained sealed by the keeper until further notice, and I time-stamped it, and I put it in the record. Because the record was their God, and I had learned to pray in their tongue. Then I went inside, and the small one was where I had left her, by the stove, away from the door, and she had not moved, because I had given her the sign for stay and held her eyes until she found in them that the next thing was for her, and she had believed me, which is the largest thing one creature can hand another, and she had stayed. And when I came in and dropped the bar, she came up off the floor and crossed the room to me and put her fisted hand against my chest where the iron was, and I knelt down to her height the way she had taught me you must, and she made the content click, once, soft, and then again, and then a third time faster, the way I had never heard her make it, and I understood that I was hearing a small one's whole heart in a sound, and I held my big scarred empty hands flat where she could see them. And she put both of her small gray ones into them, and we stayed like that on the floor of the house, while the storm I had used against her hunters closed the whole of the world around us. And for the first time in 20 years and 109 days I did not count the silence, because it was not silence anymore. They came back. I want that said too, because it would be a child's story and not a true one if they only came once. A writ is a patient thing, and the lowland does not forget a recovery that failed. It only files it. They came back twice more before the season turned, smaller columns, then a single pair of climbers with no column at all. Then, once in the high summer when the pass is briefly kind, 3 lowland clerks with papers and no climbing gear at all who got as high as the lowest switchback and looked up at the long way still to go and turned around and went home and filed something, I am sure, that satisfied someone. And each time I had the mountain. The mountain is the thing the lowland can never bring up the pass with it. They bring their writ and their warm-blooded certainty and their record, and I have the cold and the wind's highest note and the saddle that closes like a hand, and I know all of it the way I know my own hands in the dark, and they know none of it, and so each time they came I stood one still certain thing on ground that was mine, and I let the mountain do the arithmetic, and each time the mountain agreed with me, because the mountain does not care about a writ. And I had spent 20 years learning to ask it the right way, and they had spent none. The seal is still on the pass above Stair 9. I have never lifted it. It is in the record, time-stamped, renewed each season in the clerk's dead tongue by the keeper of Stair 9, who judges the way unsafe, and who is permitted to judge it so, and whose judgment the lowland honors because the lowland honors its own record above any breathing thing, which is the great weakness I found in it and have worked ever since. The way above my relay is lawfully closed. It will stay closed as long as I keep the wire, and I will keep the wire as long as there is a small one under this roof for the wire to be kept around, and there is, and she is no longer so small. She has the click and the throat sound still, but she has most of my words now too, and a great many of her own that she has taught me, so that the two of us up here speak a tongue that is neither hers nor mine, and that no one else alive could follow, which suits us. She breaks the ice off the lower dishes now, the ones I can reach standing where once I had to climb, and she is better at the wire than I ever was, having taken to the listening the way I once took to the flying. And on the clear nights when the saddle is quiet she sits at the set and turns the deal down into the lowland's voice and listens to it talk to itself. And I have watched her face while she listens, and I have seen her learn the same thing I learned. That it is a flat clerking voice that loves its record more than it loves anything that breathes, and that this is a thing you can use if you are patient, and if you have the high ground, and if you are not one of the people who does the arithmetic and hands the small one back. She asked me once in our tongue, in the careful way she asks the things that matter, why I had stood on the spur that day instead of hiding her and telling them the house was empty. She had worked out, being clever, that hiding her would have been the safer play, that one woman alone could more easily lie than fight, and she wanted to know why I had chosen the harder thing. And I sat with it a while, because she deserves a true answer to a true question, and I do not hand her easy ones. Because hiding you tells you you're a thing to be hidden, I said at last, in the tongue we built. And you're not. You're a thing to be stood in front of. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference, and I wanted you to learn it young from someone who'd stand. She thought about that the way she thinks, with her whole still face, and then she made the content click once and went back to the wire, and that was all, and it was enough. I had nothing missing before her. I have said that, and I will hold to it. I was not a woman with a child-shaped hole, but a person can be whole and still be only half used, the way a good knife left in a drawer is whole and unused both, and what she did, climbing up out of that storm and putting her fisted hand against my chest, was not to fill a hole in me. It was to take me out of the drawer. I had a thing in me I had carried up the past 20 years before and laid down to rust, a thing that was not flying and was not the wire, a plain and stubborn thing, the refusal to do the easy arithmetic, the refusal to hand the small one back, and she found it, and she put my hand to it, and I have used it every day since. And I will use it until the cold finally does its arithmetic on me the way it does on everyone who lives this high. And even then I will have left the seal in the record, and the wire in her hands, and the mountain on her side. And that is more than the lowland will ever climb high enough to take. The wind is at its highest note tonight, the one that means it has stopped being weather and started being a thing with intent, and the saddle is closing, and the seal is on the pass, and across the room a small one who is no longer so small sits at the wire with one hand fisted, always, even now, even safe, listening to the lowland talk to itself in the dark. I do not count the silence any more. There is none to count. There is only the two of us, and the mountain that agrees with us, and the long road down that no warrant climbs without my leave. Let them file it, I have the high ground, I always did.